Today, we're going to be talking about bringing threat intelligence into our everyday awareness efforts. We're going to discuss how to gather threat intelligence, process that intelligence, and develop engaging stories from it, and translate those stories into actionable steps for users. So some of the areas we're going to cover today are the why, the what, and the how. So why using threat intelligence is so important to cybersecurity awareness. How do you get that intelligence, and what do you do with it once you have it? My name is Rachel Attewell. I am the Social Engineering Awareness Program Manager for Bank of America. I've been part of the Global Information Security team at the bank for about 15 years now, and my role is to drive employee awareness on all things social engineering. Alongside designing and delivering education that supports that, I'm also responsible for running the bank's phishing simulation program. I'm joined today by my colleague, Betsy. Betsy, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, Betsy Balgooyen Keller. I am the Employee Cybersecurity Awareness Program Manager here at Bank of America. I'm responsible for our SAFE program, which is Security Awareness for Everyone. It's our internal brand that we use to educate and communicate with our employees, or end users actually, employees and contractors throughout our company. We have had a formal team. We'll see that in a moment, but I've been with the bank for 3 years and have been having all kinds of fun. Let me show you what I'm talking about. All right, so we just wanted to share a little bit about Bank of America. People don't realize we have about 200,000 employees throughout the world. We're actually one of the largest technology companies in the world. We have over 100,000 people working behind the scenes on your digital financial experience. And when I say yours, 1 out of 2 American households have a financial product with us. So for those on here in the US, we say thank you for being one of our customers or clients. We appreciate it. We also have about 950 patents and growing. We put a lot of important efforts behind our technology and have used patents to be part of that. And just as a point of reference, we work so hard and so diligent. We take our jobs very seriously because we have $1 trillion on deposit here at Bank of America. So from the leadership on down, risk is part of our everyday culture here at Bank of America. We've made it a priority. It is the first discussion point of every company meeting is risk reduction. Now, our awareness program is a recognized component of that risk reduction and was formalized in 2018. We're part of a 2,000 person strong global information security team operated around the world 24/7. And as you can imagine, we are well resourced. I'll acknowledge it. As an awareness team, we're responsible for educating end users on how they help mitigate risks, how they prevent human mistakes, and those things that we're all educating about. Don't download malware. Make sure you know where you're putting your login credentials. Watch out for spoof websites. The list goes on and on. So what we're here today, I'm going to turn it back to Rachel to get us kicked off. Rachel?
So we've talked a little bit about the information security team and the culture at the bank to reduce risk, but you're probably thinking, well, how on earth does this tie back into today's topic about incorporating threat intelligence? Well, the foundations or blueprints, if you will, great image there on the screen, trying to articulate that, of most cyber awareness programs is based on best practices and pretty broad cyber topics. So, Betsy mentioned a few there, but, phishing tends to come into it, data loss prevention, passwords is kind of a key thing, and that's great. We absolutely advocate educating on the basics. It is really super important that we get that message over to our employees and our end users. But how do you take the program to the next level and take those blueprints and foundations and actually build on them? And that's where threat intelligence comes into the equation. We will be discussing during today's session a basic framework that delivers threat-based awareness content and messaging that you can take back to your employees. So I'm going to hand over to Betsy for a second and talk about what do we actually mean when we say threat intelligence?
Now, I've heard a couple different sessions today, threat landscape mentioned, threat intelligence goes along with that. There are many information security threats out there, system asset vulnerabilities, threat actors, observe threats, observe trends, and a host of others. Now, the collection of threats comprise, what we refer to as the threat landscape. So while cybercrime being so big and growing so fast stands for reason that the threat landscape evolves along with it. And over the years, this threat landscape has evolved dramatically and will continue to do so. So, we like to talk about here at the bank, it used to be when someone robbed a bank, they'd walk into a bank. There'd be threats, cameras, witnesses, dive hacks, money. You get what I'm saying here. Now, in the world of ever-evolving technology advancements, cyber criminals continuously evolve, and they're evolving their tactics every day. And greater than 90% of people involved with cybercrime hide and change their identities. So frequently, what we're talking about are people behind screens that we've never seen on camera, have no witnesses, and it gets pretty complicated. But we want you to dive into it because there's such a wide variety of topics that help us tell our stories. Current threat landscapes, business email compromise, I'm sure you've heard the term, malware, mobile devices, global instability from global events, and utilization of malware as part of all that, destructive mail operations. I'm sure everyone has been watching the news since February and seen malware in action in part of regional conflicts. Emerging technologies, breaches, the list goes on and on and on. So while we could talk forever just on the threats, we obviously want to make this relevant. So who are we talking about here? We want to say these are the people committing the crimes. On screen, we have threat actors, can be individuals or groups. What do they want? Simply their intent is to commit illegal or malicious acts. And they use a variety of attacks to gain money, identities, data, destroy assets, discard rotation. You see, it goes on and on. So using threat intelligence moves your program beyond the basics. Not that we aren't addressing the broad threats like phishing, but when you're going beyond that, you're addressing the threats within threats. Threat intel will help you focus your awareness efforts to truly address the risks that have the potential to impact your company. Without using the threat intel, how do you know you're actually addressing the threat that could impact your end users?
Here at the bank, we are incredibly lucky. We do have a cyber threat intelligence team, and their mission broadly is to provide us with timely and actionable strategic and tactical threat intelligence that helps the key decision makers across the bank kind of reduce risk and reduce the impact from those cyber threats and enhance the safety and security and soundness of the firm while protecting our information, our clients, our customers, and our associates. Now, this team of people comprises of a lot of employees that used to work for government in defense or intelligence communities, and they have great stories about the work that they did that they can't or won't share with us, with lots of agencies that have three-letter acronyms that I'll need to confirm or deny, but they are really, really great at one thing, and that's filling our inbox with plenty of threat stories for us to work with. So a lot of you may be sitting there thinking, wow, we don't have that. Okay, yeah, appreciate that. A lot of you probably don't have a cyber threat intelligence group, and that is totally okay. We appreciate, we're very lucky to have that, but you can still do all of this without having a dedicated team that look at threat intelligence for you. You do have access to, in fact, most of the sources that the threat intelligence team here at the bank uses, and the vast majority of them are readily available on the internet at the click of a mouse. I know we're going to be talking about a story a little bit later from the Bleeping Computer website. When we shared our presentation with Lance, I know he mentioned that Krebs on Security was one of his favorites. I'm with him on that. It's a great resource to start with. What I will say is you don't have to write this down. We will be sharing this. Join us in our Slack channel afterwards, and we will have this
It's in the hallway
posted.
now.
Oh, perfect. Well done. Thank you very much, Betsy. So no need to fast and furiously write it all down. But what I will say is I am going to give everybody a little word of caution. on the screen there, we've got maybe a dozen different sites that you could go to. It is incredibly easy to become overwhelmed with the amount of threat intelligence stories that are available. It's very easy to get bogged down by them. And when you start to realize just how many new threats are coming in and being documented on a weekly basis, you may not actually want to get out of bed in the morning. It can get a little bit overwhelming. But one of the best ways to stop you hiding under that duvet is to get started and set yourself a framework for this process. And the way I would suggest everybody starts doing this, and it's certainly the way that we looked at it, is be selective in the sources that you use. You cannot possibly use every threat intelligence source that is available openly on the internet or through any additional channels that you have. Some of these sources may cover certain areas, certain industries. That's great. If that's applicable to an area you work in, perfect. You've already got one kind of nailed down there. But trying to use all of the available resources, and even if you just took this list that we've got on the screen, and there are dozens more besides this that you could look to, it will result in failure of the process just due to the sheer volume of information that you're looking at on a daily or weekly basis. So our process that we have set up, it focuses on 3 feeder streams that work for us. That's a really good number to start with. You're not overwhelmed. You can certainly give everything your full attention as you do that. And you may find that some of the ones that you pick, some of the sources that you pick maybe don't work for you. 2-3 months down the line, you think this isn't quite right. Okay, you put it to one side and look for something else. But as I say, be very selective when you start this process. And this whole process may feel very new and very alien. You may be sat there going, whoa, this is something that I wouldn't even think of attempting. So we're going to walk you through the process and see how it all comes together. So first off, I know Betsy has picked us a really good story to analyze.
I did. Let's see if I can, sorry. Oh, there we go. Zoom and I will be friends. All right, so we picked, and you've likely said, ripped from the headlines, or maybe even shown a headline from a news story on screen as part of a training. Now, I've probably done it 3 or 4 times. We advocate going beyond that headline, though, diving into the story and taking it further. So we picked a story from Bleeping Computer, as Rachel mentioned, one of our favorite places to spend time. And one of our threat analyzers, yes, there's a team here. They spend a lot of time on that site too. We picked the story that's not banking specific so we can kind of show you what we do. And it has the potential to span multiple industries due to the topic. Now, phishing attacks impersonate pharmaceutical and fake request for quotation story ran in December of 2021. So it's fairly recent. It's an example of a brand impersonation, something that we're very familiar with. Bank of America's always impersonated. One of the first things I want you to note, though, about this threat is the use of the name. We've hidden the name. It's a well-known pharmaceutical company. It's a company that we've all been talking about for a number of years now, and it carries a lot of brand recognition. I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Ooh, sorry. Ooh, there we go. Okay, so let's start by identifying the elements of the threat. At first glance, the intel may not seem applicable to you or your audience. Maybe it mentions cryptocurrency or some kind of technology that doesn't seem applicable or something that you don't use. But take a step back, look beyond the obvious and the methods used. Look at the general context and the outcome. You'll likely start to see some applicability. This is where we break it down and start using our threat framework. Okay, first step, we start by asking, is it new or novel? Have you seen this technique before? And in this case, it's not new. It's not novel. It is something that we've seen hundreds of times before. Okay, so no malware, no credentials harvesting. It does appear to be a fish with an eventual outcome of scamming money via cryptocurrency. Cyber criminals using a brand in the news and other news stories to get into our end users' inboxes. Now, at this point, you might still not see how to use this intel. We're going to keep going further. Let's talk pretext. All right. So as part of the analysis, identifying the pretext can be useful to help understand what scenario the criminal is coming at your end user with. Definition of a pretext from Merriam-Webster: a purpose or motive assumed of or an appearance assumed in order to cloak the real intentions or state of affairs. Okay, that's a dictionary definition. Let's translate that. Pretext is an excuse to say or do something that is not accurate. Thank you, Wikipedia. Let's talk examples. Your invoice is overdue. Update your account now or lose all your access. Login attempt has been made to your account. Click to see more. It boils down to, what did the criminal use to influence the target? It is a critical element for understanding, especially when it comes time to inform and educate. Keep it simple, because the criminals do. Rachel?
Having looked at pretext, some of the other things you're going to want to take a look at next, we've established it's not new, it's not novel. The pretext it's an outstanding invoice. So we're going to go and take a look at what is the threat and what is the risk associated with this. And that comes down to, what is at stake? Threat and risk do go hand in hand. That's why I'm bringing them both on the same page. So to break it down, threat is the element the criminal is after. Could be login credentials, network access, malware installation. The threat is what the criminals could gain from you, and the risk is what could happen or the outcome: loss of money, loss of data, loss of network access or availability, loss of client or customer data, loss of reputation, not one that some people think about, but definitely should be put in there. The risk is ultimately what is on the line for you. And understanding the threat and the risk in the threat intel you're reviewing helps you decide the relevance and the criticality of the story to tell your end users. So if we return to the pharmaceutical example that Betsy just shared, in that example, the threat is a bank account or payment information loss, and the risk is that money could be stolen. And it really does break down into those really simple elements. And once you get the hang of kind of understanding that, the whole process starts to become a little bit simpler to understand and apply to your processes or your business. So a couple more elements that we want to look at. We've covered new and novel, we've covered pretext, threat, risk. What about industry and audience? At this point, this is the moment the whole story really comes into focus. Who did the criminals go after? Does the pretext only work with those groups, or is there a wider vulnerable group? What I would say is, don't dismiss the threat just because the intel talks about a specific target audience. You may have taken a first look at that and said, oh, it's not really applicable. We don't sell pharmaceuticals, or we wouldn't be providing a quote to that person. Okay, but the story could actually still be applicable to your users. So when we think back to a few slides ago, when we reviewed the initial threat, at first glance, it may not have seemed that there was something that could impact your company. But the real question you actually have to ask is, could it? With a slight change to the MO, could this threat actually be targeted at your employees? Does the story indicate that your employees are at direct risk of this threat in its current form? As an example, if the threat is a phishing scam and it's targeted at, say, government employees, and that's your employee base, that gives you a pretty good indication that the threat is something that could actually directly impact your employees. Maybe it actually goes more granular than that. Maybe the threat talks about government employees on the East Coast of America, and that is specific to your group of employees. The more targeted and the more it applies to your employee base, the more you should be paying attention to it. But as I say, it doesn't mean that you have to discard it straight away if it isn't specific to the employees that work for your company. Go beyond the obvious. Maybe the intelligence is on criminals targeting an accounts payable team or a medical administrator team. Just because you do not have that function inside your organization, think about whether your end users may still actually be susceptible to a similar phishing attack. So take the audience out of it completely and say, actually, could this apply? Is this a danger to my employees? Is this something that they actually, potentially could be impacted by? If you can answer yes to any of that, it suddenly becomes usable threat intelligence. So we've talked about, new and novel, pretext, threat, risk, industry, target audience. We've really reached a point of a go or no-go decision on the intelligence. You may have said yes to any of these. If you said yes, it is new or novel. Okay, tick. I think we're pretty good with that. But let's take a quick look at the framework that we've talked about to double check on that. Is it new and novel? And it's something that you need to make sure everybody is aware of. Is the pretext approach to the target something your audience needs to be reminded of? Maybe you look at it and say, do you know what, this is not new and novel, but actually this is slightly unique, this pretext, or this is something that my audience potentially could be targeted with. It's something I feel like we need to potentially educate more or provide more education on. Would the use of the threat, the risk, the industry or audience elements help the story hit home better to your employees, help you get that message across to them? Maybe you answered yes to some, maybe you answered yes to all of the elements, maybe you answered yes to one of them. What I will say is the more specific and aligned the threats are to your organization, as I mentioned on the previous slide, the greater the need is for you to use the content in your, the story in your content or your education. When deciding whether to spend time using the threat, do make sure it's applicable and helps you get across the right best practices and education materials for a holistic approach to storytelling. If you deem it doesn't, if you look at it and say, do you know what, this is not something I want to spend my time educating on, I don't think this is going to add any benefit to our employees, I don't think this is something they are at risk of, it's okay to move on. But do consider all the threat intelligence that you look at as good fodder to bring back to your audiences. So something may happen within your company. There may be a new threat that comes out, or there may be something that starts to ramp up. So maybe your company is targeted by, more people that are phishing you or vishing you or whatever it happens to be. And you think, actually, I've got a couple of stories that I looked at a few weeks ago that may actually be applicable to that. So don't discount it, don't write it off completely, make a library, make sure you're keeping on top of all of that so that you can circle back to it and bring it into your education material to help you articulate different threat scenarios. Maybe after you've reviewed all the threat intelligence, you say, do you know what, this actually does warrant me delivering education. So what do you do next? What should you deliver? How wide should you deliver it? And who should you deliver it to? These elements will be very much determined by what this intel is telling you.
Okay, so now, as Rachel was mentioning, maybe you've reviewed the threat, maybe you've gone through the decision, and it's like something that you need to educate your users on. Maybe it's that perfect story to help remind your end user that it's something that could happen to them. Maybe this story is so new, big, and relevant that you think that launching an enterprise-wide initiative is needed. Or maybe it doesn't rise to that level and warrants something a little smaller. Only you can really determine that based on your own company and your culture and your communication channels. So now at the bank, we have a couple options. We write an alert for an intranet site. We could write an article that could move up into the intranet areas of our company. We could include a story in a mandatory training, or we could include it in a non-required webinar, or it might rise to that level of changing our core content. Or we need to create new core content, or it might rise to that level of company-wide email. And as you can imagine, with 250,000 people almost, it requires a lot of hoops to get a company-wide email sent. So for us, that level of judgment might be different than your risk appetite or communication channels available. So now more likely, you'll be looking to update existing materials to reflect the changing threat landscape, or supplement your existing materials with the scenarios or case studies. Maybe you have an internal bulletin board, Slack channel, or virtual water cooler that you could post or make people aware of the latest threats. In the event of something that's new or novel and directly aligns to your audience, you could present a substantial risk and could present a substantial risk to your business, that's the time we would escalate in our environment and ask for the company-wide email be sent out. Now, Rachel did mention a couple times library. So here, and you can kind of see some of the examples with our threat alert. We do have a place that we store threats with a small write-up. Maybe it's a link to the full story. We include those in an article wrap-up that we post on our internal cyber awareness intranet site. We do send out a newsletter, which is optional. Get the emerging threats. So we have a place that we feature emerging threats with more information and best practices that go along with it. Maybe you've decided that a good threat story is for your audience, but maybe it's not the right time for now. So that's where having that library with ready to go information crafted to be just something that you can pull out and start using really quickly. Now, what we haven't said, and as you can imagine, my fellow program manager in the social engineering area is thinking 24/7, is it fishable? So Rachel, is it fishable?
Yeah, I'm going to say this is absolutely fishable. So it's, you know, I will always look at things and say, is this something that running an internal simulation program, you know, is this a threat to our employees? Is this something, and in the instance, in the example we've given, you know, obviously it was a phishing email to start with, so tick, I'll put a tick in that box to start with. But simulating that real threat gives us an understanding of whether our employees are in fact susceptible to a similar scenario. And it gives us the opportunity to deliver follow-up education if we find they are. So, you know, measuring end user behavior is always tricky. It's like unicorn, as I always say. It's out there somewhere. I know it definitely is, but I don't think anyone's quite given us a definitive as to how you actually do fully measure end user behavior. But by using these threats in your simulation programs, if you run one or if you have a third party that runs one for you, you can really gauge where your vulnerabilities actually lie. So in this example, it's actually a great use case for a phishing program. And this example and similar threat intel stories are the kind of thing you really should be looking to replicate on a regular basis. You know, the work has been done for you. This is a fish. There's very little you need to do to replicate this and send it out to your employee base with an understanding as to whether actually they would fall for it or not. And again, it's a great way to get into people's mailboxes and deliver that follow-up education, so that if you are only delivering education on a periodic basis to them, this is a great way to follow up with them. Now, what I will say is, if you do implement all the things that we've been talking about today and put the framework in place, how great would it be to have an outcome that you can tell your management team, along with your internal and external stakeholders, that you are in fact really addressing the threats that could impact your company. Hey, I've seen this. It looks like something. I've gone through my framework. It looks like something that could potentially impact us. You know, it's not something I want to produce an article on, but I could use it in our phishing program. Look, these people fell for it and I delivered them education. That's perfect. You can absolutely document that. And more to the point, you've got the entire process end-to-end documented in your framework. So tick, tick, tick. Everybody loves a good evidence trail as what you're doing. But I am going to hand it over to Betsy just to wrap things up. So Betsy, what should we take away from today's session?
All right. So as we've mentioned, don't overwhelm yourself. Make sure you pick a few sources, not all of them. Make sure you're using that framework to help you judge that criteria. This isn't meant to overwhelm. It's meant to be guidelines that you can set a process up for success and not end up in a continual cycle of reacting to the latest news. You can be reacting, like starting up your TV and wanting to get back underneath that duvet because there's so much to tackle for that day. So set your sources, set your framework, and we're just hoping that everyone picked up at least one or two things that they can use today. We really appreciate your time and listening to us.